But what I want to do is go ahead and kick off the show by welcoming all to the Blue and Green podcast. Now, this podcast is titled Blue and Green Show, regarding an open conversation with, where appropriate, civilian law enforcement officials, that's the blue, and military servicemen and women, that's the green, about various topics, events of J6, January 6th, and many more topics: policing, police brutality, suicides, domestic violence, human rights. And that's something that we really want to get into, and that's why we have invited, again, to the show. And again, I am the host of the show, Major Cecil Davis, U.S. Air Force, retired. And today's podcast show is featuring our guest, Dr. Zena Crenshaw-Logal, Executive Director of National Judicial Conduct and Disability Law Project, Inc. It sounds rather ambitious as a title, based in Atlanta. So without further ado, I would like Dr. Crenshaw-Logal to introduce yourself to the audience. Just say whatever you think is necessary to speak to introduce yourself to us, and then we'll go on with some, I think, some pointed questions there that I feel is going to fall within your purview. So, Dr. Crenshaw-Logal, you got the floor. Let's hear about you.
Well, thank you so much, first, Major Davis. I want to thank you for inviting me on to your podcast, and it's an honor to be able to talk with you about these very pressing subjects. And you're absolutely right. The name of our organization is pretty ambitious, National Judicial Conduct and Disability Law Project. We call it the Law Project for short. And the attorneys who proposed that name, it's a takeoff from federal legislation that first enabled private citizens to bring complaints of misconduct, judicial misconduct, or disability and job performance, bring complaints against U.S. federal judges, because prior to enactment of that legislation, there really was no process in place for complaining, the general public to complain about federal judicial behavior. So we made it. That's the name. That was, at the time, that was the name of the statute, the Judicial Conduct and Disability Act. And so we took that title because we knew that the judiciary would know when we say we're the Judicial Conduct and Disability Law Project. Basically, we were saying everything that has to do with oversight of judges and considerations of their competence to do their job. We're looking at that. That's our project on a national basis. So it was a tongue twister, but we wanted to send that message to the judicial branch, that all things with regard to judicial conduct and competence would be within our scope of consideration.
Okay, yeah, and that's a great explanation. As a matter of fact, it brings to mind one other thing that we with the Blue and Green were looking at in terms of active duty servicemen. I mentioned I speak for the Air Force vets, and we have a website or platform, www.afvets.net, and we encourage all who listen to the show, even if you want to take a look as well, to see what we're all about. But as far as the misconduct, et cetera, that you talked about and that you track, we've certainly seen that. We have access to, and I'm trying to get as many veterans and other interested parties, such as yourself, hopefully, to look at this document. It's kind of referred to as a whistleblower document. I think that one of the topics of your books, your publications, mentions about the whistleblower and the anticipated fate of some ne'er-do-well people would like to do. But it gets into cyber intrusions that has affected certainly me. I'm a retired veteran, in active duty, in terms of income tax laws. You know, the IRS, whether or not they want to admit to it or not, there are some rogue players that are out there, and they have victimized me and several others. So I'm trying to, in a sense, through these programs, initiate a movement, if you will. Now, I'm not going to do the Million Man March, you know, as far as veterans or anything. I'm not anticipating anything that robust. But as far as getting the word out, as far as getting the interest call the interest, then maybe someone like you could probably help, in assisting us to do that, because I think it's something very, very much needed, attention drawn to that. I could probably make the whistleblower document that I referred to. I can make that available to you. And I think that as you have time, and I know that with your very, very, very ambitious and busy schedule, I don't know how you do that, but hopefully you're a speed reader. And if you're not, once you get started with this whistleblower document, it's quite the page turner. Okay. It really is. So I think that'll hold your attention. So that's what we're shooting for. And again, it's on behalf of the, we say active duty veterans, and we say Air Force veterans, but it's all services. And some civilians who are involved with that, of course. These would be the dependents, the spouses, children, et cetera. And then maybe others who can fit into that. And that's why I keep putting out the website platform, www.afvets. And that's A as in Alpha, F as in Foxtrot, V as in Victor, E as in Echo, T as in Tango, S as in Sierra.net. So please do that. What I'd like to do, though, and as I was doing the research, as I always try to, I want to get everything as much on point as I can. I was fascinated. You're quite a prolific writer. Yeah. It's some of the topics, I just said, well, I'm just going to just throw them out there. We're not going to dwell on these topics because I don't want to take away from our presentation. But I said, it takes quite the imagination. But it's very substantive and it gets to the point. I saw the publication, The Official End of Judicial Accountability Through Federal Rights Litigation. And that was the Ashcroft, I guess John Ashcroft, former Attorney General, versus, if I get his name correct, Iqbal. He's a Pakistani Muslim. Yes. And that's pertaining to the 9/11 incidents or situations and all. And that caught my particular attention, especially since we've just had the recognition of those events and all. And how Iqbal, I guess, was pursued or tried to get grilled over something. It immediately brought to mind, and I think something that all Americans remember, the Timothy McVeigh issue with the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, where initially they tracked one individual all the way to London and arrested him. And boy, Timothy McVeigh got a pass, so to speak, because they were busy chasing this guy, and he had free reign. So I was fascinated by that title. The next title, I really kind of got a kick out of the title, and I know it's going to be, once you get into it, it's going to be a page turner. But How to Get Away with Career Murder, the unconstitutional blueprint for systematically purging whistleblowers from U.S. law enforcement. And I got captured by that title. Another of the publications, Americans in Jeopardy, When Human Rights Protection Becomes America's Executive, Legislative, and Judicial Branch Shell Game. Yes. That's imaginative. Next one would be Judicial Impunity, a likely inadvertent but deadly failure of American democracy. And that brings to mind J6 and a couple of other things that hopefully we'll get a chance to explore in detail. The other publication I mentioned would be 2020 Vision, Shattering Delusions About the Demands of Human Rights Protection in America. And that all speaks to your particular area. But before we get into those items, I'm just kind of curious. How do you characterize yourself in terms of the groups that you have co-founded and their missions and charges? How do you characterize yourself? Back in the day, we probably would have said gadfly, but no, that's too cheap. That's not you. That's not you. We're in present day, so that would detract from your overall purpose. Some would say, and probably detractors on you, fly in the ointment, not. You're too intellectual for that. So fly in the ointment, no, that's a characterization. Wouldn't. How do you characterize yourself and with all that you're doing?
Well, I've relatively recently settled on characterizing myself as a human rights defender. Okay. And I have not always focused in on that title, but after a while, that seemed to set in my mind most comfortably with what I was doing. Of course, I've characterized myself as a legal system reform advocate, a judicial accountability specialist, but human rights defender is what I've been settling on most recently.
Okay, then, well, we could live with that. And like I said, there's a lot of utility. Hopefully, the people who are listening will kind of be able to approach you, professionally and just say like, hey, I think we probably get a help or a handle on this, because I did not know until I did the research that someone like you was out there. Yeah, I
Yeah.
got to think it had to be, but I couldn't put my finger on it. But now that we have you, and we're so glad to have you as a guest here to do that. Now I'm curious. You know, this is an interesting area, human rights interest stuff. You know, where do you get your grit from? I mean, I don't believe you just showed up on the scene with the motivations that you have, with the interest that you have, pursuing the direction that. Where do you get your grit? Where does that come from?
Well, unfortunately, this is a movement, a reform movement that too many people get drafted into because of their personal encounters with what's been characterized as organized abuse of the legal system that's facilitated by presiding judges. So by organized is suggesting it's deliberate, is by design, is by explicit or implicit agreement. And it's not much different from my work as a civil trial attorney. I started practicing law in 1984, I believe, and soon, about a year into it, I was in a small firm and was able to take on some relatively complex civil litigation on behalf of the plaintiffs, the injured parties. And so I was doing this in the state of Indiana, which is his pretty much historically a pro-defense state, a state where we were going up against uh, business entities that often had big insurance coverage, and so we were up against the corporate attorneys who, even though ostensibly they represented the entities that we were suing on behalf of our injured clients, we called them insurance defense attorneys. So these are people with tremendous um, resources, large firms, um, a tremendous clout. And Indiana tended to be receptive to their defenses as opposed to our claims for damages. We focused in on relatively complex civil litigation. It was some auto injuries, but it would get into considerations of insurance coverage, whether it was actual coverage, and then sometimes we get in more complicated areas of law, highbrow areas of law, medical malpractice, that sort of thing. And going to work we were a small Black firm, and in a very racially polarized state and county of the state. Um, my colleagues had told me, they don't let us practice this area law. We got the minority lawyers in our area got steered to either be in private practices handling high volume cases. You made your money by handling a lot of the cases, but each case bought in modest, if not small sums of money, or we got steered into government, either as lawyers or public officials. So we were bucking against the trend by a handful of, I just thought absolutely brilliant Black attorneys, and I'm just going to slip myself in there, handling these personal injury cases. So we were going to make our mark. And, while our white counterparts could perhaps get a case resolved with a phone call, we had to fight, to establish that the facts and law supportive our client's claim. I felt like, what's that, Russell Crowe going to work every day, just with,
Oh,
both hands wrapped around swords, double-edged swords, just sort of backing off the resistance. But we were ultimately able to get recoveries for our clients. So once, at some point, the resistance in our local area, I was prepared to say, enough is enough. This is reflecting a pattern of resistance in a court serving our area to minority lawyers, and so I was focused on how they were resisting the claims. I talked with the local trial attorneys, I mean, excellent trial attorneys. And, if you couldn't get a case settled, just a negotiated resolution, and you found yourself in having to defend in court, almost invariably we were facing defeats. And after a while, it was starting to be clear that race was a factor in the outcome. You could actually objectively discern a race seeming to be the turning consideration. And that's where it all got started. That was in 1997. I had a press conference and, made the allegation. It was precipitated by a case that a judge had thrown out. And so we were calling for an investigation. We had support of business people, sitting state legislators, the woman who went on to become our state attorney general. We had supportive comments from one of the Black justices on our state Supreme Court. And so we were calling for an investigation of this. So it started off with a really big bang. Everybody was excited, but the system pushed back. And so eventually the only one who got investigated was me.
Not the kind of attention that you were looking for. If somebody would say, hey, that's kind of like with fringe benefits. No. We don't want those. But that's okay. But that's remarkable. I have to ask the state of Indiana. I'm a neighbor. I'm from Ohio, from Dayton, Ohio.
Yes.
And we always thought or knew about Indiana. As a matter of fact, as I taught, and I teach freshmen here at Tuskegee University, which, that's kind of my full-time job, working at the university. And I would ask them a simple question, and I'm a director right at the state of Indiana. I'd ask them, I said, and especially some of the kids from like New York State, Illinois, Chicago, Los Angeles, what is the most prejudiced state you can think of? The one where African Americans get the most difficulty? Mississippi, wrong. Alabama, nope, not even close. And I tell them Indiana, and a gasp would go over there. And at the time, something that they could probably identify with, and maybe in a younger life, I said, you ever wonder or see what happened to Mike Tyson up there?
Yes, you have paid attention.
Yeah. And I tell them that, and for those who aren't aware, I tell them about that. I said, so let me tell you about Indiana. Indiana is a very unique state. It is somewhat a difficult state. There's promise. But then we look at the politicians who come out of there, Dan Quayle, Mike Pence, need I say more? And so Indiana to me has been, to be honest, it's been an enigma, but, as all enigmas, they can be resolved and all. But now you mentioned about, of course, the African-American firm that you're with and all, but now special category, I'm going to put you out there, African-American female. How many of y'all were out there?
In Northwest Indiana, we were there. And there was resistance, I think, that could be described as gender. I don't tend to focus in on gender bias because to me, my first line of conflict that needs to be resolved is resistance I perceive as a Black person. But in Northwest Indiana, there was that other distinct layer that other Black attorneys have women attorneys have talked with me about, and even beyond Black female attorneys, and that is gender bias because it was an environment is sort of among our colleagues, members of the bar, that, well, if we have to deal with a Black lawyer, it at least could be a guy. We can pat each other on the back, and they didn't know quite what to make of it, of the Black female lawyer. So it was another layer of consideration.
I know it was probably something that one would not necessarily think about unless you're there, and of course you're around it. But you mentioned Northwest Indiana, so initially I come up with Gary,
right?
Gary,
right.
Indiana, and all that goes with that. Some people say it's really South Chicago. No, it's Gary, Indiana. It's not South Chicago. And all the things that go on there. But I certainly appreciate that formative work that you did there, because somebody had to do it, and all. I know that you feel like you were out there, type of thing. A firebrand in some ways, especially a 1997 type of thing, going back to that time frame. I didn't know that sort of robust type of work was being done, but like I said, like the civil rights movement, you were fearless. You had to be fearless. Yes. You didn't go to work worried about what could possibly go wrong, but something will go wrong. You just go ahead and go with a positive approach. But I'm curious also. Now, in your formative years, as you're coming up, grade school, high school, going off into college and whatnot, who were your heroes? who did you kind of look up to like during that time? I mean, who are your heroes?
Mm, that's a that's a good question. Um, you know, I I can't. I mean, I'm sure I had any number of people that I admired coming out of, being relatively young and getting older, but so you're still having hearing of the great icons of the civil rights movement.
Hmm.
Um, but I guess my heroes tended to be local teachers that had inspired me,
Okay.
and all I knew, what sticks with me most about my formative years is that I decided in the seventh grade, I think I was about 12 years old, that I wanted to be a lawyer, and
Okay.
everything I learned about that profession just confirm that aspiration. So I'm just one of those people who being a lawyer wasn't what I did. It became who I was. So
Hmm. You anticipated my next question because I was thinking, law degree, like
mhm,
say, why law,
mhm,
what drove you to this particular discipline? I think you just answered that question there. So, and I appreciate that because at some point in time, like with me, it was time to figure out what am I going to do in life.
mhm,
And of course, I grew up a project kid from Homeview Courts Projects, West Dayton, Ohio.
mhm,
And it's a very interesting time. But as I was coming up, my heroes were, of course, I saw Martin Luther King initially, and then as we got into the college years, I had a chance to go to well, back in the day, we called it Georgia Avenue Prep School. People said no, it was Howard University. And so I was in the big city from Dayton to Howard, Howard in D.C.
mhm.
I saw my heroes kind of changed over a little bit. Oh, we had a H. Rap Brown, we had a Stokely Carmichael, and I didn't agree totally with everything that they did because keep in mind now I was in the Air Force ROTC program, so I had to kind of mute some of that. I
Yes.
didn't, I didn't want to get drummed out before I even got started. But I never forget that. I think my daughter was born, and I really wanted to name her Angela because my last name was Davis, so I thought that'd be a
Oh,
great
that
fit.
was no, my goodness.
No, no, I was talked out of that. Being a young lieutenant in the Air Force, they didn't think that'd go too well.
Okay.
It really discouraged me riding my little blue Volkswagen. They said, you really ought to take the liberation flag off the back of the car. I mean, you're a commissioned officer. Do you really want to go there? So I thought it was kind of unique. But it's interesting. Law. Now I know that you help out poor folks.
Mhm,
And I could say that because like hey, that was me coming to poor folks. We were in the projects. Mom and dad never finished high school. When I tell some of my college students that, oh man, they hung out at the mall. Well, back in those days, there were no malls.
mhm,
No, to hang out.
mhm,
They had to go to work and all. So that was my plight. But I built on that because of the work ethic my dad had coming out of West Virginia. And and I've told folks, and these are my heroes as well. Mom and dad both were considered, from mountain stock, mountain folks.
okay.
Mom grew up in the Allegheny Mountains outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Her dad and I think my oldest three uncles worked in the coal mines type of thing. So
Mhm,
that's what they did. My father grew up in the Blue Ridge Mountains right outside of, out in the western part of Virginia and all. So, and his work ethic was tough. He was, of course, went into the military during World War II, and he made master sergeant in 3 years, which is virtually unheard of. But that was that ethic, and so he brought that to me.
mhm.
So that framed what I was going to do. Going to college, that's a unique way of kind of putting. I just kind of wandered into that one, but I went with it. But I took that work ethic and all that I got coming up in the projects and all, and put it to work. So I kind of knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to go just be a career military officer, and that's what I did. So, and I could see that, from the same thing you said back in the seventh grade, you knew you're
Yes.
going to be a lawyer. What was it? Was it someone in the community, a lawyer that you saw? Was it watching the episodes of Perry Mason?
No, in fact, we some of the minority lawyers, some of the minority students that went to law school with me, we talked about having a disadvantage because we were there studying law, and we hadn't been surrounded by a lot of lawyers. So many of our white counterparts, their families had large law firms, and it was sort of like we didn't have the benefit of that orientation. So it was sort of like trying to do something that you had never really seen be done.
Mhm.
Um, and I, you know, I didn't have so much of a lot of lofty, I want to help people kind of aspirations. Just the practice of law intrigued me, what it entailed, because it was about um, persuasion, written
Mhm.
persuasion to a lot of extent. People think it's just about arguing all the time, but you know, it was much more than that, and it just seemed intellectually very satisfying to me.
Okay, that's yeah, and that's explanatory to me as well because, like I said, I have a piece of that too, so I knew about
Hmm.
it. One thing I'd like to venture into now, and just to get your take on it, and that'll be J6,
Hmm.
the events of January 6th
Yeah.
of this year, and as I was working with the producer of the show, we do our little brainstorming. We do our little back and forth to do figure out some things. He kind of blew my mind with something, and I want to get your take on this too. I hadn't never thought about it. Of course, being a career military officer, et cetera, I know exactly who the commander in chief is. I know his powers, et cetera.
Yes.
But he mentioned something, and we wondered about the legal question. Um, you have certainly, and everyone knows this is not a state secret. There were active duty personnel who were involved in the quote insurrection.
Hmm.
It's a fact. Now, a lot of them are, of course, incarcerated, detained, waiting for, their futures and all to be resolved or to be borne out. But then we thought about it, says, you know what? The commander in chief over all the military is the president.
Yes.
He, in we say he didn't directly order, but as you learn in the military way of doing things, commanders don't normally directly order anybody. That's probably way back in the days. They will suggest something, and then you know that that's a direct order without
Okay.
being given it. He did invite parties to go to the Capitol, and he was going to join them, which of course he did not. So then you get to thinking now they're being held in a civilian situation. Uh, is the civil civilian jurisdiction have jurisdiction truly when these active duty personnel, and I don't know the numbers, I see various numbers, they were following directions of their commander in chief. So should that be a UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice, Title 10 type of thing? What's your take on that? Because I had never thought about that,
Hmm. Hmm.
and normally whenever you would have a situation where, and I think that the book that just came out, and I got to read it because I hadn't had a chance to, Peril, with Woodward and Costa, talking
I
about the
haven't
sort
read
of
that.
things that, of course, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, brought up. One would quickly say, well, looking at J6, obviously we suspected that the guy was unhinged, so therefore, but he wasn't. So please speak to that because it's curious.
Well, you know, Major, I'm not an expert on the Uniform Code of Military Justice, so you can probably correct me. You know, my impression is that that is the code is definitely going to apply if a military service person, a U.S. military service person is on a base, you know, a property, military property,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, if he or she is engaged in an active military operation, it's going to regulate their conduct. Um, Now, definitely, the president is our commander in chief, and if he were to take the position, or anyone took the position that he ordered with any type of, you know, formality, you know,
Mm-hmm.
if that concept sticks with regard to characterizing his interaction with his military service, then yes, you know, they're acting on orders, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, the prospect of President Trump being willing to characterize his involvement as in any way commanding or ordering what happened on J6 are so remote. I mean, he's just not going to uh, concede or suggest that they were engaged in any type of military operation when they as part of the insurrection. So it was short of that context, just because, as you know, you're in the military, that doesn't exempt you off of military, official property, and outside the context of military action, that doesn't exempt you from the force of civilian law, civil law, or criminal law. So technically, yes, but it would take the president being willing to concede that whatever encouragement or suggestion or hand sign or whatever that he gave,
Okay.
high five, thumbs up, that he intended that to be an act in his capacity as commander in chief, as opposed to any number of other ways that he can act. And so he's just not going to say that. But if they are able to characterize his conduct as some type of instruction of the insurrection, then yeah, they would be exempt, I would think.
Okay, yeah, because
From exempt from our civilian law.
okay, and I was thinking as you're mentioning, like in any furtive gestures or whatever, short of throwing up gang signs, and that would be totally out of the question. You wouldn't do that. But also, the question came up in my mind whenever the president would be kind of operating off the rails, would be a judgment of diminished capacity.
Yes.
And then if they wanted to go that route, I thought about it. Well, how would they do that? Now, Millie has, through his book, you mentioned In Peril, the book by Woodward and Costa, that he had surmised, of course, the conversation went on with contacting the Chinese communists, their command structure, and saying, hey, look, really, no matter what you think about the 6th of January, it's not, what you may think that it is, type of thing. And of course, there's a hubbub and furor about that. But I think that General Milley kind of, well, it seems to me like, and I don't know from a legal perspective, we'd have to prove this, but anytime that the president would be, like, say, of diminished capacity, and of course the vice president would then take over, that never happened. I think that the discussion could be with General Milley, well, are you a clinical psychologist? Are you a psychiatrist? How did you make this assumption that? And then that would really throw the thing, into a big bailiwick, and who knows. So I just wondered if there'd be any recourse, because I know these active duty personnel who are now finding themselves incarcerated are caught up in this conundrum.
Well,
will reach for anything they can.
Can I ask you, Major, what do you think? I mean, can the commander in chief, can a sitting president of the United States, lame duck or not, ever act outside of, I mean, is he or she always our commander in chief, even if he's at, at a private family gathering, are they always acting as a commander in chief with regard to everything they say or do? Or can they, take the position that, no, I was, I've shifted out of that role, and I was acting in a private capacity or some other capacity? It's a good question.
That is, and I don't think that they have that luxury, because, like I say, once they raise the right, like my uncle, his guys say, raise the right hand to the man, do a lot of swearing, and get into the office. You got to really be careful, because you're under a microscope type of thing. So I think that you always have to be wary of the open mic, or the the hot mic. You always have to be wary of that. And in this society, of course, with the media, instantaneous, catching something, putting somebody on blast, as the kids say, you have to be very careful. And I think that in your scenario, yeah, I mean, he's at a family gathering, off the cuff, whatever. I don't know that one could say that the president is ever really off the cuff, or really, type of thing. And I thought that, of course, we watched, with curiosity, as he was hospitalized to do his bout with COVID, and what was going to happen. Were they going to actually declare him, inadequate for duty, and then make Mike Pence? That, I don't think that ever happened, really. Because then that's a Trump personality. You won't let that happen.
Right.
Let go of the reins no matter what you're saying. But I think that, and with so many people listening, with the media being as rapid as it is now, people catching on, you have people with questionable motives about things. people who are waiting for the a certain gesture, a certain expression. As I think, and when I talk to some of my retired, fellows, I keep up with all of them.
Mm-hmm.
They were stating that, especially the African American retired officers, this whole thing with the Trumpism thing about abusing personalities, et cetera, started with. We'll all remember that the one rally, and they had the young African American male that was kind of claimed disorderly, was carried out, and he got sucker punched by this old white guy.
Yes.
That that put on the green light, bright and clear, and everything went downhill rapidly. Well, for us, went downhill, probably went uphill for them,
Mm-hmm.
but type of thing. So, and again, with that, your question, it's kind of like, I guess it's who's listening, what is said, and who's listening. So I think we could probably go with that. One thing that I noticed in the work that you've done and all, you tend to, of course, gravitate toward helping poor people,
Mm-hmm.
and that's commendable. Now I have a friend here, he's local in Tuskegee. His favorite expression, hey, ain't no money in it. No matter what you say to him, hey, there's no money in it, type of thing. So I didn't know. I'm thinking it's probably drawing back on some of your roots and all as to that motivation to reach out to help poor people. Because Lord knows I came from that
Mm-hmm.
aspect. It's good to hear someone of your stature, working in that direction. We feel like we don't, well, we wouldn't say necessarily a savior because we know what a savior is, but,
Mm-hmm.
someone out there is going to advocate for us, and we appreciate that. So, helping the poor, where did that come from? Is it just a natural thing?
Well, to tell you the truth, my work is not uh, charitable. We go where certain patterns of abuse exist,
Okay.
and this organized abuse of the legal system is a equal. It's become rather equal opportunity. So
Mm-hmm.
some people are poor. And that makes them vulnerable to certain patterns of organized legal system abuse. Let's say, for example, the perpetuation of mass incarceration. Typically, who's getting targeted are poor people,
Mm-hmm.
and particularly poor Blacks and Hispanics, and then of course indigenous Americans. However, is really people who get disenfranchised, and so I'm always advocating for people who have had their financial stability taken away from them, either because they never had much money or in the course of having the legal system weaponized against them. Now that concept is really familiar among international human rights advocates. The notion of a legal system being weaponized against certain disfavored populations is not so common, or has become more common with regard to the United States. You hear me talk about the organized legal system abuse, and then some people characterize it as racketeering. They repurpose our courts, and they're accomplishing. Sometimes it's just social engineering.
Mm-hmm.
One, what's his name? Oh God, I can't have to think of his name because he's came out of Ohio. The professor who says that we should stop thinking of our courts as conflict resolution centers and start thinking of them as power distribution centers. And so, these cases individually, there's always a decision made as to who's going to get the power and who's not going to get the power. But insofar as talking about what I do in terms of economics and the economics of the people I'm helping, um, one of the biggest what's happening with these abuses of the legal system is you're having a redistribution of a nation's wealth from certain groups to certain groups.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my personal opinion that if we can re-inspire a fair and impartial administration of justice, you would automatically see a dramatic redistribution of wealth that would have don't want to use the trickle down effect, but it would
Mm-hmm.
have an impact on so many other societal concerns. And let me give you a quick example as to what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I was working with this young lawyer, and he and his business partner, had a case where they were robbed of a potentially lucrative real estate development deal.
Mm-hmm.
And their recovery, they literally and it was easy to establish that a $30 million recovery for them would have been quite reasonable. And the grounds for their recovery were obvious. You know, this misuse of the legal system, it's not close calls. You know, reasonable minds can differ. You know, I look at a case and think it means something. You look at it and you think it means something else, and we're both intellectuals. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about you know, pretty blatant robbery.
Okay.
And you know, if we had the not only legal capacity but the public relations wherewithal to shine a spotlight on what's happening in that case or any given case where this abuse of process is just unfolding right before your eyes in a relatively blatant way, then we could help people like that prevail, as opposed to what usually happens, they lose. So then we put, you know, some significant amounts, certainly of millions of dollars, in the hands of two aspiring Black entrepreneurs. And just that's all you have to say to consider the implications of that wealth distribution on the Black community, you know, at large, locally and then nationally. So that's what the money is about, getting us in a position that we can protect our interests effectively in court. And you really, yes, there's some people who absolutely are poor, but when you're up against a legal system that's failing, that's been compromised at every juncture of oversight, from, you know, a motion to reconsider in the trial court level, to the U.S. Supreme Court, to Congress, to the FBI, to the Justice Department, everywhere is compromised and is geared to sustain the status quo. Multimillionaires, you know, Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey have raised their hand and say, okay, I give, when they ruffled a few feathers and they saw the power of the system turned against them for a couple of minutes. You know, we love to hate him, but look at President Trump. You know, he's got a couple of bucks anyway. He certainly is a media a lightning rod, and he can't. You know, he is very effectively discredited, neutralized. Of course, he helps. You know, that happen.
Get
But
those fuel on the flame.
he just makes himself a easy target. But you really can't have enough money to back off what can be brought to bear when the system is determined to deny you a fair and impartial consideration in this country.
You've described headwinds, and no matter what, I think one of my earlier shows, I did have an attorney who, you know, he had a pretty interesting background, et cetera. The name wouldn't be appropriate, but he's stating that that's kind of the institutional thing there, status quo, don't rock the boat type of thing. And then, of course, it begs the question, what would happen to the boat rocker? Well, we don't want to do that, you know, type of thing. So, and you've described it, the headwinds. So, you know, usually, you know, like with me in my career, I always took what I call the Texas Ranger approach. I don't walk away from a fight, I run to a fight. And of course, in my 20 years, people say, well, I got kind of, you know, knocked down a couple of times too, but I got up. But it's almost like a monolith type of thing, you know, where the headwinds come from.
Yes.
And you spoke to that. Can you see maybe any daylight, any headway? We're going to keep trying. Obviously, you're not going to give up. And I could tell just by, you know, your character, your personality, you're not going to give up. You know, I'm going to keep on firing away with the questions I have. But something that you wouldn't know about yet, but you kind of speak to what I had mentioned about that whistleblower document, the cyber intrusions that actually got into the payrolls, retirement payrolls in my case, of veterans and active duty personnel. You have a very unique group of people there who've been taught, if you are confronted with recognized authority, what you perceive as being legal authority, giving, you know, legal instructions, et cetera, orders, then you follow. So it's not like we're gullible. It's not like we're being, dragged along. But
Mm-hmm.
now this whistleblower document, and I'd really like for you to get a copy of that, take a look at it, because you may have some constructive ideas considering your background and the areas you've worked, to maybe help out, make maybe a suggestion or something. And we'd be wide open on that one, because it's something. This document has now it's been approved by a sitting federal judge, Judge Peter Massetti. He
Okay.
signed off on it. And upon further scrutiny, I think it wasn't necessarily an appeal, but upon further scrutiny, a U.S. attorney named Rod Rosenstein, before he got into other, I shouldn't say notoriety, but he got his name known, he
Mm-hmm.
signed off on it as well. So now it's time to go ahead and put this to the Supreme Court. Crickets,
Mm.
crickets, nothing else. The only person within that purview who was actually successful in getting any kind of resolution is an attorney, and if you want to kind of like make a little crib note about his name, Attorney Freeman. He's out of Dallas, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And what he did, considering that document, considering all the subject matter of that document, he was the one who actually, and it sounds like something that you might want to consider doing or whatever, or you might have done. He got together with an investigative reporter out of the Dallas Morning News. Of course, I'd lived in Texas. I was assigned there for about 5 years. So Dallas Morning News is like the WAPO or the the NYT all over the country. If you go to the Southwest, everybody knows about Dallas Morning News. He enlisted a investigative reporter, and both of them went to Washington D.C. and got in somebody's face. And guess what? He got resolution for his clients
Mm-hmm.
who had appealed over the same matter of cyber intrusions that took money from them, and they were awarded quite handsomely. But they were the only ones who got that. So one gets to thinking, is that what it takes to actually get all your forces together, get the huffing and puffing and go up there and like get in somebody's face? One would like to think that, well, that's not necessarily hood, can't say that. But, vigilante, no, that's too strong. But is that what you see has to happen? Or is there another way we could probably finesse this and maybe get the same result? Because we are talking with some veterans, et cetera, talking with the actual author of that document.
Mm-hmm.
He said that was the only success. He had his document again approved by a federal sitting judge, Peter Massetti, Rod Rosenstein. He presents it, crickets, nothing happened. And I'm always aware, because I did work the Washington, D.C. area. I was, the good Lord bless me, with this time with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And for the time I was there, I was running scared because what is this project kid doing in the Joint Chiefs? But I learned a lot about the inner workings of Washington, D.C. And I know that there are ways of being successful. There are ways, people out there who want to have this happen. And so we're looking for that person.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if you get a chance to take a look at the document, or maybe further talk with my producer, I know you know the producer, my producer, we can do that. But short of that, what do you think? I mean, I don't want you to give the opposition your playbook.
Uh-huh.
We're not going to do that.
Well, we've been really public. We're going to go, because our organization is functions as a think tank. We're
Okay.
constantly looking at this challenge of this again organized abuse of process, and
Mhm.
so it's a twofold consideration. We're looking at, well, what does it take to be effective as an advocate? Okay. And
Mhm.
because there's some lessons learned, that's one benefit of people collectively. We've been doing this for 20, 30 years. You
Mhm.
get so you don't we shouldn't have to be doing anything trial by fire at this point. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
But another um, overriding consideration that our organization is addressing through a campaign called Opt-in USA is we're pushing for enforcement of America's what's called the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, and ICCPR. And
Mhm.
in that document, the United States pledges, like any other nation that's a signatory to the document, to that
Mhm.
treaty, human rights treaty, is that they will provide their citizens effective avenues of redress. And whether an avenue of redress is effective or not, it has a technical definition. But the point I'm making is we're not supposed to, some of us win and some of us lose.
Mhm.
We're supposed to have effective avenues of redress when we're alleging that our rights are being violated under color of law. What we were able to get the UN Human Rights Council to agree in 2018, believe it or not, is that when you're alleging that the legal process is being abused and that abuse is facilitated by judicial misconduct, if that's your allegation, the
Mhm.
United States does not provide effective avenues of redress. What we get is, remember that article that you talked about is a shell game. What we get
Yes.
is a shell game. We're chasing the rabbit. And some people spend years, decades even, chasing the rabbit. That's not an effective avenue of redress. An effective avenue redress is, among other things, prompt. It's
Mhm.
reasonably prompt. You don't spend your whole life trying to get a fair and impartial consideration of an alleged, often pretty blatant, legal system misconduct. So that, in my opinion, that is a fundamental obligation of this country. I see it as more fundamental as even making sure that we have the human necessities of food, shelter. Um, it, to me, is more fundamental that the government protect us from
Mhm.
those in power who are inclined to oppress us systematically, misusing their power. So we went to the United Nations Human Rights Council, and at that point, we were able to present evidence of all these different attempts to get redress by people with all types of backgrounds. And then we also provided historical analysis and social science research that had been conducted over time. And for example, there have been universities that confirm that when you're alleging some type of federal violation of rights by a prosecutor or a judge, they were confirmed back, I think it was like in 2014, that nearly 100% of the time, I mean, literally from 98 to 100% of the time, the Justice Department would decline investigation if you were trying to
Mhm.
make that allegation with regard to a prosecutor or a judge. Even if the FBI recommended an investigation, they would decline prosecution. So we
Mhm.
took that type of, that again, we've been doing it. And so this research has been happening. We have examples of sophisticated advocates who have tried it. We have examples of, more of a perhaps less polished advocates. And no
Mhm.
matter what your background, you know, most often your efforts are unavailing and it's costly, and it's so we went to the Human Rights Council, and
Mhm.
lo and behold, because it goes to a working group,
Mhm.
a working group on communications. And these are, even though some of the council members are, come from countries that have, historically authoritarian. I mean, they're the biggest human rights abuses imaginable. Um,
Okay.
this panel is comprised of scholars and experts from that country, from
Mhm.
different countries, on human rights abuses perpetrated by sovereign powers. And
Mhm.
lo and behold, they determined that the notion that the United States has a de facto policy of judicial impunity, and not immunity, impunity, meaning
Impure.
nothing's going to happen to them.
I got
With regard to the role of judges in this persistent abuse of the legal system, they determined that that allegation is not manifestly ill-founded. Of course, they couldn't determine that yeah, they in fact is judicial impunity. In other words, you're not going to get anywhere in the United States if you're alleging your judge was, the fix was in and the judge was in on it. They couldn't say, yeah, that's true. That our country has a policy, because they haven't examined all the evidence. But they did determine that the allegation that that's happening is not manifestly ill-founded. And they should have. This was the United States of America. They should have said
it.
that's preposterous. They don't do that in the Great
Give
West.
themselves Can they
they
hear themselves?
they ruled that that was not manifestly ill-founded at the request of our organization. I mean, W.E.B. Du Bois went to the Human Rights Council when Eleanor Roosevelt was founding the United Nations, and she was
Mm-hmm.
a board member on for the NAACP. And Du Bois spoke on behalf of the NAACP and asked the
Mm-hmm.
Human Rights Council, "Could you make a determination that the United States was engaged in a gross pattern of human rights violations with regard to Black Americans?" And they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. Now, it was political, but they wouldn't do it. And what I'm telling you is our relatively mom and pop organization, it's no government grants, no, no corporate sponsors, no major
Mm-hmm.
corporate sponsors. When we went and we had our evidence, all these writings that you've referenced, we took them and we said, you know, a pattern of judicial de facto pattern, because if we have time, I'll talk with you how that happened. It
No, we
just
can. Yeah, we
it
can.
okay. Well, de facto policy, because what we brought out was a historical analysis. Believe it or not, it was published in the Indiana Law Journal.
What?
And what the Professor Gay is what his name is. And what
Okay.
he did was he tracked centuries. And the question was, why is it so difficult to get Congress to do anything in response to alleged needs for judicial oversight and reform? And what
Mm-hmm.
he pointed out is that it wasn't always like that. Now, I'm a poor student of history, so don't get me to be quoting which presidents and what he was talking about. But he pointed, and not to mention, I got so many facts in my head I can't remember. I'm glad our names are on the screen so I can remember our names, including my own.
There
But
you go.
what he pointed out was there was a time when the executive branch would be more confrontational with
Okay.
the judicial branch.
Mm-hmm.
You had presidents who would take issue with the U.S. Supreme Court. Because the U.S. Supreme, on behalf of average people, because the U.S. Supreme Court were trying to rule that Congress did not have the right to regulate child labor, to promulgate child labor protection. So
Mm.
Congress and presidents, I mean, the U.S. Supreme Court was ruling that they couldn't do things that they were trying to do on behalf of the general public. In fact, there was one case where Congress actually moved to impeach a federal judge because he threw a lawyer in jail because the lawyer was wrote a critical article about the judge in a local newspaper, and they impeached that federal judge. So in other words, there was a time where Congress and the president would haul the judiciary, particularly federal judges, in the court on behalf of we the people. Well, over time they moved away from it. And they basically took the attitude of, look, you got legal process. And so don't come to us trying to get relief based on a judge doing his or her job. You got appeals, we got a whole legal system out there. If you have compelling evidence of criminal activity, then go to the FBI, go to the local police and stuff. But don't come in saying they're biased against whistleblowers. you know
Mm.
they're biased against federal employees, they're biased against, don't we're not going to look at their rulings. and
Mm.
and and it actually is somewhat laudable because we're in, what is it, the greatest nation of the world, so a
Mm.
few people have said, and we have a legal system. So take it up with the courts. Don't come and uh sit down in some congressperson's office and say, Joe, I got shafted, you know,
Mm.
and it's my opinion. And remember, they've zipped through and discredited me and derailed my career. And I'm talking about these, esteemed jurists.
Mhm.
And I'm saying that, they're crooks. And they're like, they don't bring that here. Now, if you, no, we're just not
Don't
going to
bring that
do it.
noise.
Don't bring that noise because I've seen come on, this just go. And so what happens is if you have compelling evidence that they're bribing, they're getting bribed, or they're engaged in some type of garden variety criminal activity, and you
Mhm.
have compelling evidence of that, fine. But don't come in with this touchy-feely stuff and
Mm.
expect us to call our judicial system on the carpet. And it's somewhat admirable. But the point that we made to the Human Rights Council is the job, ultimate job of our judiciary is to provide a fair and impartial administration of justice.
Mhm.
And if we cannot look at whether they're being fair and impartial, if the only thing you're going to look at is whether, whether they're not racking up too many DUIs,
Mm.
or whether they're not taking too many bags of money, then, you know, looking at whether they're fair and impartial is about looking at, bias and intangible, touchy-feely sort of things. And
Mhm.
lo and behold, they agreed with us. Now, a few months before that, um, the United States withdrew from the UN Human Rights Council, and so I admit to everybody I have delusions of grandeur. That they knew that these people that were favoring our complaint, and that's why, because they, okay, I'm in defense. And everybody's gonna say she's really got delusions and it's a conspiracy theory. But the ostensible reason for withdrawing from the council were reasons that they were complaining about the council. They had been doing that stuff all along. Oh, you're too critical of Israel, and you got too many human rights defenders. That had happened all the time. The only thing that was new was the interjection of our complaint that this
Mm.
legal system, they had a policy of basically doing nothing. So um, I'm going a long way to get to this destination of, just what do we do. Um, the point is, the UN Human Rights Council had, they made a political move as far as I'm concerned. They said, we're not going to escalate your complaint to what's called a situation. Your complaint is not manifestly ill-founded. We are willing to consider it further, but you need to go back and give us more evidence that this impacts uh, uh, a gross. This is a gross impact. Now, I didn't agree with that because I felt like we had established it was a gross
Mhm.
impact, but that was the political decision. It was sort of like a Solomon decision. They gave us great leverage, but then didn't really give us relief and sent us back to the drawing board. But because they were willing to consider the
Mhm.
case further, under
Yeah.
international law, they cannot intervene unless there's a determination that the United States does not have effective avenues of redress. So what we
Mm.
brought to Trump's administration's Trump's attention is that
Mhm.
because they're willing to intervene, they've determined for all practical purposes that there's not effective avenues of redress in
Mm.
this country. In other words, they've determined that our country is in violation of this pledge that they provide effective avenues of redress. And this is and then, okay, just a couple more points and then I'll be quiet. We went to the president. Um, we At this point we were working with the Human Rights Committee. This is another body. The Human Rights
Mhm.
Committee recommended, as it does to all nations, that they sit down and talk with us and other stakeholders. The Trump administration wouldn't get in touch with us despite our request for meetings. Then on January 15th, the Trump administration issued a statement. Now, January 15th of this year, in other
Mhm.
words, he's a lame duck president, but he was speaking on behalf of the United States. And he says that, yeah, in essence, yes, we're only going to address the most pressing crisis. So while that's, the implication is what we were talking about is critical, it's a crisis, it is a violation of the treaty, but we
Mhm.
have more pressing things to do. And so basically, you know, the president suggested that there were segments of our country, that segment of our population that was not going to get effective avenues of redress. Um, because, and the insinuation is that there weren't enough of us. Because, they want you flooding the streets, George Floyd kind of protest
Oh
level.
yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
we And we're disenfranchised, we're persecuted people. It's hard for us to wield that type of power, because
Mhm.
solidarity eludes us. So they knew that. So they basically said we have more pressing things to do. Well, what we came back and pointed out is that's not the way it works in the United States. Didn't you get the memo? We don't have a caste system. You don't
Mhm.
have classes, first class, second class, third class, and we're in the class that doesn't get effective avenues of redress. No, that's a privilege and immunity of American citizens. I don't care if it's just me and Major Cecil. We are
Mhm.
entitled to that privilege and immunity. And so we've asked President Biden, are you going to let that stand, that the United States is going to be the official position that the United States is denying segments of its population, this privilege and immunity? And so far, they haven't said anything. Okay, this is the clincher. Meantime, everybody's going to court. People are being criminally prosecuted. People are having determinations about their life, liberty, property, family relations in a country that the UN has said does not have effective avenues if you allege that the disposition of your case was not fair and impartially, deliberately so. We're in a country that has been declared, if you're saying the outcome of this case is because of a railroad, you don't really have any effective avenues of redress. And the
Mhm.
Trump administration said, and we are not going to do anything about that anytime soon. So
Mhm.
what do, Major? Let's
Mhm.
say you been ordered to show up, report, let's say in 30 days, and surrender yourself um, to serve a prison term.
Okay.
And you have alleged, with whatever degree of credibility you want to say, that this was in retaliation for your whistleblowing. And you have a circumstantial evidence that of the prosecutor's involvement, the judge's involvement. You have all of that. You've exhausted your avenues of redress. You've done all the motions and motions for rehearing, and either you um, going to, trying to seek cert with the U.S. Supreme Court is going to be futile, or they've already rejected you. So, according to our country, you just go ahead. I don't care how compelling that evidence is of this railroad. And believe me,
Mhm.
it can be very compelling. You just
Mhm.
better show up with your, and submit yourself to serve your time.
Mhm.
Alternatively, become a criminal of some type of fugitive. And so, what is the next step for us? Well, this roadblock has implications. Do you, and I'm just going to ask you and your audience, just instinctively, do you believe that, whatever the court order, no matter how compelling your evidence, if they tell you to show up and submit yourself to prison, or death by firing squad, or turn over
Mhm.
your children, or walk away from your business that your grandfather started,
Mhm.
do you, no matter how compelling your evidence of that this is just a railroad, do you
Mhm.
are your only choices to do it or engage in some type of cr- criminal conduct, at the very
Right.
least civil disobedience? I
Mhm.
posed that question to some medical professionals who are dealing with this problem, and they told me about there's a lot of Afghan doctors who they just disappear. So do we see that as do we really think that's our only option? Just show up for the gun squad,
Okay.
prison, or turn over whatever they're saying, or engage in some type of elusiveness that's going to get you at some point deemed incarcerated, whether it's civil or criminal.
Mhm.
Do we really believe that's our only options? And we're going to be contending that no, that's not our only options. And I mean, that's not even our only peaceful option, let alone, some type of criminal activity or violent resistance.
Mhm. You
So it's
know,
two levels. We're challenging the system, but we still live here, and we're
right.
we're looking at how to be the most effective working within the current system, because we still live here, but on the same token, we're putting pressure on the system to provide us effectiveness.
I think that answered a question that I was going to ask probably as we begin to wrap up. What do you foresee for the future? And I think of expressions I heard back in the old civil rights era. I think they attributed to the civil rights icon Fannie Lou Hamer, no ways tired, no ways tired.
Mm-hmm.
And even at one point she said, sometimes I'm so tired, my hair is tired. I'm that tired. So
I know.
I know it. But it sounds like, hey, you've already embraced that sort of thing, but you're going to keep on pressing. And I applaud that. And I'm going to mention just one thing real quickly. And I've seen what you've talked about on a grander level, on a grander level, something I saw personally. I come up for promotion to lieutenant colonel. And the promotion board, was run illegally. How do I know that? Because, and I'm going to say this, I hope they're listening in my listening audience, the dummies didn't have the sense enough to realize if you're going to pass over somebody for promotion, the guy who's the recording secretary in the promotion board, promote him. If you don't promote anybody else, promote him. He got passed over, so he made a long list of all the discrepancies. The main one was that how the board was conducted. And guess what? We thought, oh man, the smoking pistol, we got it. You still the spark from the smoke coming out. And the major general, 2-star general, who chaired the board in retirement, came out, deposition, said, although unintentionally, I did in fact run the board illegally. Guess what? We were told, and I was told by there's attorney Jock Smith, he's one with Johnny Cochran group, God rest his soul, he's passed on, but he told me, said, Davis, you're not going to be successful. You're not going to prevail. I said, we got the smoking pistol. The guy came out there and said he actually did this. You're in the era of a conservative court. You will not prevail. Guess what? He was right. And I get to think, we just legitimized bank robbery, because you got a conservative court, and like, hey,
you're really giving a color to what I'm saying. Yeah. Basically, our country is saying that we just have to accept those outcomes because they're not going to do anything about it.
Wow. And that's it. And that hurts, but it's the truth. Like I say, it's the truth. So, but like I say, that's all I can say to you is like,
it's God not really the truth is what they're trying to sell us, but it's not the truth. And so we're going to be challenged in that.
I know that. Well, I tell you what, I was going to ask about, future endeavors, but I think you've covered the whole gamut. So I just want to say personally, I do appreciate what you're doing. Keep on keeping on. We hear that expression as well. And like I say again, if you ever want to got some extra time, which I'm sure you don't have, listening to your daily curriculum, the things that you do. We got a bunch of veterans out there, and we could use maybe a little bit of advice, like maybe just write us something there. But we sure would like to have you come on board with us.
Oh, but anyway, well, I would love to work with you all because that's our strength.
You bet it is. And like I say, again, a lot of veterans who did nothing wrong other than the fact that they followed orders. They were told through, and what happened was, we hear about the Trojan horse thing about getting into different things, spurious items. What was utilized at whatever level was a Trojan server, which produced spurious documents that were incorrect. But boy, they looked legal. As a matter of fact, I think the IRS owed me $106,000. I've had a computer forensic pathologist, a forensic auditor take a look at my case and say, hey, that's true. They really got you. How did I know? How could I know that? But what I'm saying is, if you want to election, I'm gonna send you that. I'm gonna get that document to you there. So if you take a look and says, you know what, I got a little extra time here or there. Am I being just bold and forward? Yeah, I am. But anyway, but I like to say, like was it the rest of the rock? You say, can you smell what the rock is cooking? I can smell what you're cooking, like that. And I said, yeah, I like it.
And I can add, and then I'll shut up because I know we're coming to a close. People talk about persist and keep on keeping on, but I don't intend to spend much more time being a nuisance. We're going to push this to some conclusive victories because, just sort of hanging around and being a fly in the ointment